this is the moment I wait for every year to be with my brethren. You should know them now as the Core Four because we haven't come up with a better name. We are here today to talk about. Oops, hold on. Let me do it one more time. Wait. Okay, so I'm off my cue. So we are here. I'm gonna do this again to talk about
the funky new album entitled.
All right, we are here to talk about what I call the Love Symbol album, and I have to introduce my brothers. We are going to start off with Zaheer. Just introductions. Zaheer Ali, who's a oral historian and one of my favorite people on the earth. And then we also have Mr. Anil Dash, CEO of Glitch, an amazing platform. If you haven't checked it out, I personally think that everyone should use it to understand how programming works. Even if you don't become a programmer, it's an amazing platform. And we also have the author of Promise That You Will Sing About Me, Miles Marshall Lewis, also known as my frenemy. Just kidding. He is beloved, even though we never agree. And we're definitely not going to agree because he tried to bait me on Twitter and I refused to do so. And we also have another Arthur. We have Elliott H. Powell with Sounds from the Other Side. So if you haven't picked these up, I just make sure that you do because we want to support them. And Arthur Turnbull, who is my co-host, and he is going to be joining us. He was here with us, but then he disappeared, but I'm sure he'll be coming back. And for those of you who don't know me, I am D'Angela Duff, also known as Polished Solid. So we're going to start off gently. We're not going to jump into Love Symbol. We're actually going to start off with a question from the last panel that Richard Cole asked, because I wanted to ask this question. So I was really happy to know that other people are interested in this question. So Richard Cole asked, do you think this era would be best represented by a box set that covers both Diamonds and Pearls and the Symbol albums with a separate reissue of the albums or a super deluxe for each album? So should they be combined, Wonder Twins Unite, or separate in terms of a super deluxe box set? Who wants to take that?
I'll jump on that.
Yeah, Anil, only because you were unmuted.
I'm ready. This is such an interesting point in his career period, right? I actually really think all the way through 1990 and Graffiti Bridge, Prince is still working through the decade begins with the prototype of the Revolution and ends with sort of the last Revolution tracks or era tracks that he puts out. And so I think this is really turning the corner into the 90s. And I do think Diamonds and Pearls really blends into, this Love Symbol era. I think you look at the Act 1 versus Act 2 and the tours. You look at material that moved between the records. You look at I think the Sexy MF single, I think, came out closer to the release of Diamonds and Pearls than it did to the Symbol album. If not, it was, a hair's breadth the other way. And so there's just such a blending. And then, of course, the band, right? Like, you have some minor changes here and there, but for the most part, the band is the band, and the band is in the sound. Like the band is on the record. It's not just, on the tour. And so I think it does make sense to think of these as part of a whole more than most eras, right? Like I think there's a very distinct bright line between some other sort of back-to-back records that you could draw as much more distinct, whereas these even sound wise, I don't think there's any song you couldn't move from one album to the other that would all of a sudden be like, what's that doing there? That's not part of that record. So selfishly, you want more, right? I think there's let's do the special deluxe, everything, all the things. But I think it'd be hard to find, this song was for that record, not for this one, and really draw a bright line.
Awesome. Does anybody else want to jump in on that?
No, I mean, not too much. I wholeheartedly agree. I mean, I think they could be grouped. That hasn't been done yet, but I think that if it could ever be done, these two albums make a lot of sense. It's the same band. It's it's right before he changed his name, but right after he created the band in the first place. Like, you know, they're very compatible. You know, we've talked in the past about Prince twinning a lot, you know, where two albums sort of match each other. These albums definitely match. You know, it could be a double super deluxe. Why not?
I mean, I kind of see that. I do think that there are some really interesting distinctions. I think some of the early presentations have alluded to what is introduced with the Symbol album that is unique. I also think what would be challenging is are the live, you know, and live sets have not really been significantly included in previous issues, but there's a lot of live material here that would be really, really interesting to get in, you know, quality, you know, form, whether it's the new show, you know, what he was doing with the Diamonds and Pearls tour, the Act 2 show, the Sacrifice of Victor show. You know, I wonder even, so like the tail end of this period is like the NPG album, Gold Nigga, right? So like I do think that there's a lot of material here that I think would be a challenge for a single issue.
Okay.
I mean,
Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say this quickly. I'm gonna, I think, agree with Miles and Anil here. Sorry, Zaheer, but I think they work as a package deal for, I think, all the reasons that are said. Obviously, right, there are some sort of B-sides, right, that are shared as well in terms of Love Symbol and Diamonds and Pearls. And I think, right, it's with Real sort of Three Chains of Gold that we also see the like departure of Diamond and Pearl, where there's a kind of closing. There's a kind of closure that happens that gets introduced with Diamonds and Pearls that I think it just kind of makes sense to actually pair them. And especially if we think about the movie, if we think about that and how, again, we see a birth of the symbol, right? That this is now going to be a new name. And so it kind of closes a chapter, and that allows, I think, the estate to then kind of release things when it's just under sort of the artist, right? So like, I think it kind of putting them together creates somewhat of a closure on things that therefore open up for things that we see later on in the 90s. So for me, I think so logistically, it makes a lot more sense.
So for me personally, I totally understand, Anil, what you were saying about you really can't tell what song is on what album, because sometimes I myself get super confused on which album a song is on, like Strolling, for instance. Sometimes like I just swear it was on the Love Symbol album, but obviously it's not on the Love Symbol album, it's on Diamonds and Pearls. But at the end of the day, anybody who knows me, or even if you don't know me, you should know I want separate box sets. The reason why I want separate box sets is because the Love Symbol album in particular is just so rich in terms of all of the material that he created to support it. So you have the album, but then you have the Act 1 and Act 2 tours. I'm really big on live prints. So it's like if we could have some Act 1 and Act 2 shows in there, just like the Sun and Time Super Deluxe with the Utrecht show, it would be incredible if we had more than one live show. And then you had the 2 TV specials, and then you have the To Whomever, you know, it may concern, that little clip, which I absolutely adore. And then you have the 3 Chains of Gold video collection. And then you have the comic books, because you could also package those in there with that as well. And I feel like if it comes out as a combined box set, it's going to diminish the output of Love Symbol, because for me, and we're going to get into this, I prefer Love Symbol as an album head and shoulders above Diamonds and Pearls as an album. Now, there are some songs on Diamonds and Pearls that I absolutely adore. I see you guys geared up. I see you guys, they're being nice. They're very nice to me. But like Strolling is one of my favorite songs of all time. Money Don't Matter Tonight, one of my favorite songs of all time. In real time, I did not like Diamonds and Pearls as an era because it was pop Prince again. You have to understand, I came into Prince at Dirty Mind. And so my favorite Prince is the Rude Boy, the Dirty Mind controversy Prince. Even when Purple Rain came out, I was upset because it was pop Prince. I was not used to pop Prince. And then when Diamonds and Pearls came out again, I was like, here we go again, pop Prince. And Diamonds and Pearls at the time, I love it now, at the time was one of the most saccharine songs I had ever heard over just over Arms of Orion, that I absolutely adore. Just kidding. So I think that Love Symbol is a brilliant album. It's an interesting album. And I know we're going to get into it because a lot of comments online leading up to the symposium and just in general about the Love Symbol talks about how it's a complicated album. And I know it's a complicated album if you listen to the lyrics. But as I've said a gazillion times on these panels, I enter Prince through the music first. And I just think it's a better album musically. We can have some conversations about the lyrics and like the content, but musically, like there's only like 2 songs that I just can't listen to. But other than that, I can actually listen to this as an entire album. And I think it is an incredible album. In real time, I listened to this a lot. It was really, really awesome. And I was able to see the Act 1 tour at the Fox in Atlanta in March. And you have to understand that I hadn't seen them since Love Sexy. So 5 freaking years, you had to wait for a live tour in the States. And it was like, like a long time. So I was really excited. And then I was able to get my signed copy from Prince. I got to meet him at Turtles in Atlanta. I was in that line. If you've seen that MTV footage.
Me too. I was there.
Yeah. So you know what was up. So
and I was at the Fox.
Yeah. So it was like a long line to get in Turtles. It was a lot of just excitement. He looked incredible. I mean, just like incredible, like just impeccable. So this is an amazing era for me. And I just don't want it to see it conflated with Diamonds and Pearls. So that's my 2 cents over 20 minutes. So Miles, do you want to say any more about your Atlanta Tower Records experience or anything like that?
Well, sure. I mean, I think that when he was in town for that, wow, I wish I had my journal handy. He partied somewhere like that weekend. And I remember finding out about it and going to the party. And I guess that was the first time that I was like sort of in a club atmosphere with him. And it was like, oh, wow, there's Prince, And he had his little, Maite was there, I guess. It was a little entourage. And I remember them like leaving, and naturally the people I was with, we had all eyes on him at all moments. And so we saw that he left, but the club hadn't realized that he left yet. And so my crew sort of like went and sat in the area and sort of, drank the rest of his wine and sort of, like, pinched, the rest of the spoils that were left over. And, maybe they didn't realize we weren't with them. Like, they hadn't really kind of figured it out that Prince had left the building. So so that was a little moment. And I think I grabbed a glass and sort of had that glass in my house for a long time, that someone had drank out of.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, that show was amazing. That was like maybe the 3rd time I had seen him. I had seen Prince and Revolution during the runs from Madison Square Garden in 1986, and then I saw him at the Omni. I think you were also there.
Yeah, I was
Love Sexy. Yeah, that was dope. He played 2 dates. I think I only went to one of them, and then the Fox. And the Fox, it was just I was never ever disappointed seeing Prince live.
Yeah.
So it was an amazing show, and that's it.
But for anybody who hasn't been to the Fox, in my opinion, the Fox is one of the most majestic venues you can see anyone. It is a beautiful venue. So it was just even more magical with having Prince there. We have Arthur with us. We had a bit of some Airmeet technical difficulties because that's how Airmeet rolls sometimes. But
I think it was something about me saying the Love Symbol album is trash, and then D'Angelo was like, nope. Nope.
Yes.
We will have none of that.
No, we will not have any
None of that. None of that.
None of that. Okay. All right. So, Arthur, what we're talking about is, so Richard Cole posed this question that I actually wanted to ask anyway, and I was going to start it off, and it just so like happened to really fit. Do you think this era would be represented by a box set that covers both Diamonds and Pearls and solo albums, or should they be released as separate deluxe box sets?
I think they should be released as separate box sets, actually. I think the Love Symbol album in and of itself is Prince leaning into the gangster glam phase of the early 90s. And I also think that with the amount of content that he produced and released, I'm thinking about the Ride Divine TV special. I'm thinking about The Undertaker, which was recorded at Paisley Park in between Acts 1 in the US and Acts 2 in Europe. Should be represented there and should not be overshadowed by Diamonds and Pearls material, or vice versa, for that matter. I think that the fact that he resurrected what he calls the love symbol, but the unification symbol of the two genders from 1984 is a big deal. I think the addition of the swish, which then in 1992, and now even more strongly, I believe, is a horn, a trumpet, if you will. That's a reference to the Book of Revelations. And I'm glad that some of our earlier panelists, sprinkled Lovesexy on this conversation, because this is not some kind of singular thing where he's been injecting Christian theology directly from the Bible into his costuming. By your invitation at Spelman, I was working to make the connection between the question of you, between Lovesexy and going all the way up to the Rainbow Children, where in '88, as part of his Lovesexy costuming, he had the word Prince written on his thigh. And to me, that was the symbolism of to say that I am one of those who, have been chosen, to follow, to be a part of the reigning king returning, whose name would be written on his thigh. The number 7 in 7, I think it was Seeley that talked about Prince killing off, his own 7 demons, but there are also 7 angels, 6 of which gave a warning, gave time to those who were living in sin to come to salvation. And then when the 7th trumpet hit, that was in fact the final blast, the final call. All of that is wrapped up in the Symbol album. And all of what Seeley was talking about with Egyptology and, an Eastern face, and, the origin of Maite coming into the story. Soon after that, the origin of origins, maybe not the best word, but the addition of Moritz Hayes, who was probably the longest standing band member and musical director in Prince's entire career, begins to play a part. There's a ton of narrative for this album, and I don't think that it should be combined.
I totally agree.
A ton of narrative that will sadly go unexplored by any issue, because, well, that's a whole other conversation. I'm going to stop right there.
Because I want to hear it.
Just because I think that this level of nuance that surfaces at these symposia are often lost in the official narratives that are produced. And I do know that we sometimes get really deep into what some people would call the weeds that are not of interest to a general population. But I do think it's really important to give people the critical tools and reference points to, if they want to, have a much more deeper appreciation of this thing, right? When I was a kid and I went to art museum and saw like paintings, all I had in terms of my reference points enough to be like, oh, that's a nice painting, like that's cute, or that's ugly, or I don't like that. And then when you study art and you study what people were trying to do, then you go and you look at the same thing and you're like, oh, okay, even if I'm not that particularly drawn to this thing, like I appreciate what the person is trying to do here, right? And I do think that as we move forward, this sort of literacy around music and art and design and embodied performance should be elevated as part of this process, right? And I think for many of us who came to Prince, if for whatever reasons that we sort of stuck around for the ride through all of the ups and downs, like by the time we get to the Symbol album, you know, he had gone all over the place. But if you stuck with it, you were rewarded with being introduced to different musical vocabularies. You were being introduced to different ideas about visual aesthetics, about even notions of spirituality and sexuality, some of which has been explored. And I think to me, you know, that's to Arthur's point, like why an album like this deserves its own outing, you know, because there is a political awakening that is happening that Prince is paralleling in this work. That's both very, you know, indirect. I think Erica, I was really happy to see her reference the Afrocentric movement. You know, the whole debate is raging amongst intellectuals about were the Egyptians Black, right? Like we're the cradle of African civilization. And, you know, Prince, this is his entrance into that debate. The fact that it's a pyramid that's on the album, you know, cover is really significant. But also listening to Seeley talk about Prince's Sacrifice of Victor and the way he's not so celebratory about the project of integration, right? And thinking about the shortcomings of that in the post-civil rights era. But we have to remember that in 1991, Spike Lee was making the movie Malcolm X and needed money to finish the film and went to Prince, among other people, got some money from Prince to finish making Malcolm X, and in turn, directed Money Don't Matter Tonight, which was Prince's most explicitly political video in his career, right? And in the you know in the context of the Gulf War, it's critical of like Colin Powell and oil and militarism. And we know that Prince loved movies. And so obviously if he helped fund the movie, we know he watched Malcolm X. And one of the several of the themes of Malcolm X in terms of Malcolm's exploration, obviously of a spiritual tradition that is outside the Judeo, or that is, you know, beyond the sort of limits of the Judeo-Christian context. Malcolm's whole thing about in the tradition of changing your name and the idea of slavery, like all of this stuff is Prince is adding to his language. And so what we get musically with the Symbol album is a processing of the new information that Prince is coming across. And so, you know, so I think that's why this deserves its own outing, but it deserves an outing with that kind of scaffolding. And so that's, you know, that's kind of where I start with my like little cynical, like, well, will they ever do that? But that's what we're doing. And that's perfectly fine because we're the ones to tell the stories that other people can't or won't.
Thank you, Zaheer. I really do appreciate you. Thank you for that. All right. So we're going to get started with our usual inquiry because I love, as I've told you many times, my grandmother says, don't mix it up. And I think it's a really great question because we can go different places because that's what we're going to do anyway. So when it comes to the Love Symbol album, what is your favorite song and what is your least favorite song? And we're going to get started with Anil Dash.
Oh, gonna put me on the spot. All right. I'm gonna go with easy ones here because there's actually a lot of answers I can go with, and it does change for favorite in particular. I think 7 is the favorite. I mean, it's just something special, and a lot of that. It wasn't at the time. I mean, I liked it, but it wasn't like the song on the album for me. But it was live. When it was live, that was like as special a thing as he ever played. I think, you know, like the first time I ever saw him was at Paisley, and he played 7. And, you know, and he had done Call and Response a million times, but to have everybody in his house singing that song together, you know, was just transcendent. It was just that thing, that moment that only he could make, you know? And so I think, and also just that he always zigged when somebody else was zagging, right? So everybody, like, you think about the moment of maximum New Jack Swing production, and the kind of basically the noisiest pop music has ever been, in a good way. Like, I love that about it. And he's also, he's listening to, Bomb Squad and everything else on the record. And on this one, he's like, how about an acoustic guitar? Which we had never seen him lead that far in the front in the mix on anything. He played, but it wasn't like that was what you saw him playing. So 7, I think, is just something special, and then worst, for me, arrogance.
Favorite, least favorite.
But it's the worst is arrogance into the flow, right? And I think it's like they're almost like segues, like glorified segues. Like, there's just a lot of noise in the track. There's a lot of narrative. There's a lot of Kirstie Alley, which I'm sure we'll talk about. There's a lot of Tony M, which I'm sure we'll talk about. It's like, none of this is what I came here for. You know what I mean? Like, this is not, it's the same dude that was just doing Sexy MF a couple tracks ago, right? Like, really?
They suck. They suck.
Well, I'm not a fan. It's not to my taste. I cannot imagine there's somebody's like, let me go cue up the flow and drop the needle on it.
Me?
All right. My imagination is limited. It's hard. And the thing is, I liked parts of it. I mean, I actually still love the lyrics of Arrogance. I love, like, this man knows who he is in the world and is going to tell you about it, and you better accept it. You better love it. And I always love that. I mean, we talk about the moment, the historical moment. I had just rewatched, Spike's Malcolm X the other night, and was thinking about, they were filming the videos. I mean, he's got all this footage. He sent Maite to Egypt. He's doing all this stuff, and he's clearly taking in what's around him. And I think that sense, I always thought of, like, one of the things Prince took away from that moment was, like, I gotta love myself so much that everybody else does too, and that is a Malcolm X message. That is a Muhammad Ali message. I mean, this is something there's a connection to. And so I love the lyrics of Arrogance, but, like, I think he was in a lot of ways testing out how to be other versions of himself. And we'll talk about this with other songs, I'm sure. But when he's doing My Name is Prince, he's kind of doing a Bomb Squad production of LL's Knock You Out, right? And you can hear those pieces. We talk about that. And it's like, that's not him, but it's interesting. He's trying those shoes on. And he obviously, 3 Chains of Gold is trying on, his Freddie Mercury shoes for a minute. And I mean, I always love anytime he had that energy of, like, anything you do, I can do, and better. Like, I love that, but it's also not Prince, right? Like, that's like, we like when you do you. And so that's, like, kind of the feeling about the whole album. It's like, there are high highs on here that I love. Just some of my favorite tracks, some of the favorite moments. I love the truth of the Sacrifice of Victor. I think it is the first time we ever heard him very plainly drop the facade, talking about, Bernadette Anderson, talking about his own childhood. We'd never seen him do that without the veil, and so I thought that was pretty profound. But yeah, the lows on this were the first time I really felt like, oof, I got to skip that track. And maybe it's because CDs were new. Who knows?
Awesome. All right, Arthur, I feel like you need to go next. I kind of saw some facial expressions.
Let me just say, Miles looks annoyed through this entire section. He's just perturbed. Like, you don't even need to go to him, right?
That's why I skipped.
He just taps in a little bit. Trash. So this is okay. So this is a difficult. It's a difficult thing for me. I mean, I really struggled with this album. To this day, I struggle a little bit, less than, but a little bit. And full disclosure, this was the only Prince album that I have actually picked up the CD and thrown into the trash. And part of that reason was the frustration that I was having with it. And Anil referenced a lot of that, where he was, working out different versions of himself. one thing that I had to, and I actually am going to answer your question. One thing that I really had to come to grips with around that time was that beginning with Diamonds and Pearls, there was a new audience that was coming in to the tent. And I had to kind of step back and think, okay, do I want to let all these people in? You know, Prince had secured such a large audience in the 80s going into 1990. And now I felt that he was sort of banking that audience at the risk of spending some of that credit to expand his audience, while at the same time completely changing his sound, which we're not new to him doing, but not in this way. And that I liked the way, I appreciated the way, it's actually a better way to say it. I appreciated the way that he wanted to expand his sound, pushing acoustic instruments more to the front. But I was still disappointed that the man that had been so creative in his drum programming was now relying more and more on samples. And that's not the Symbol album's fault. That was actually starting with Batman, the Graffiti Bridge album, and into the New Tour. And I wasn't really a fan of that. I also had a big distaste for, let me say this carefully, not Tony M specifically, because for what he was doing, Tony M could rap. The thing was that in the early 90s, hip hop was going through its own issues with rap being in R&B and pop music. Q-Tip himself on Check the Rhyme talked about rap is not pop. If you call it that, just stop. MC Hammer was pushing popcorn nuggets for Kentucky Fried Chicken. MC Brain's Oochie Coochie was #1 on the rap chart and was in the top Billboard Top 20 in 1990, 1991. Candyman's Knockin' Boots was at the forefront of what radio programmers were calling rap music. We had a problem with that as the fans of rap music. Contrast that to Michael Jackson for his Dangerous album, working with Teddy Riley, wanted to get an MC on a record. So Teddy called Heavy D. So it was basically like, okay, I'm going to get somebody of stature to be on a Michael Jackson record. Prince, always doing stuff in-house, nurtured his own people. And okay, cool, that's fine, but that just was not for me. So favorite and least favorite. Least favorite actually more difficult, but I'm going to give it a try anyway. I think that my favorite song is The Morning Papers, the totality of it. I liked a lot of the messages in the lyrics. I love the instrumentation. I love the guitar solo. I loved the chorus. I really loved that song. In reality, it's actually my second favorite. My favorite is the first third of Love to the Nights. Once we devolve into the booty boom section, it becomes a caricature of, just the, it was just what the fuck, it just did not seem like he was serving the song with having that section in there. God Created Woman, wonderful song. 7, not my cup of tea, but I get why it's so good for a lot of people because it's very anthemic, and it speaks to a higher message also. Least favorite, really tough. Shout out to the trombone solo in the flow. Otherwise, I'm not a big fan of that song. I gotta tell you, I think that I might get kicked off the panel again, but I think my least favorite song is My Name is Prince. Now, the music that I heard from this album live, fantastic. I saw a Chicago show where it was Prince on his Warwick thumb bass, the I bass, playing against the drum programming and singing My Name is Prince, doing that song live. fantastic just by himself, single spotlight. But on record, I had I just had a problem. I just could not get with the gangster glam era of that career. And yeah, that's kind of been the relationship between me and this album, for the better part of 30 years.
All right, thank you. Elliott.
No, thank you. I didn't mean to get it off my chest for a while.
All right, Elliott, we're gonna come to you, Miles and Zaheer, but Elliott, please bring some positivity.
I don't know where to begin, because Arthur, you really just, usually Miles is the one who hurts my soul. Now I feel, Arthur, you've now taken that. Listen, Miles, you're still gonna, I know you're gonna say something that I'm just gonna cry about, and it's gonna really hurt me. And we can probably rehash it because you're coming to my class next week. So we can even talk more about this. So, for those who don't know, and I don't think I've said this, is like, I came to the Love Symbol album later in life. It was not necessarily an album that I had access to, that I could actually listen to when it came out in 1992. So a lot of things, I ended up coming at it a few years later. Diamonds and Pearls was okay in my parents' house, but the Love Symbol album was not. And so I have a different kind of, I think, attachment to it. In terms of, sorry, my mind is now going all over the place. One thing, okay, this is what I'll say before I go into my favorite and least favorite. One of the interesting things that also needs to kind of be discussed when we think about the Love Symbol album is, what if we think about the kind of rage in My Name is Prince as being tied to the wrath of one of the deadly sins? What if we think about the kind of self-centeredness in a song like Arrogance as being another seven deadly sins? So what I'm trying to kind of argue is, one of the, I think, really interesting things about the album is that the tracks themselves are dealing with these seven deadly sins. And so when we end in a particular way, where Prince, on a song like Seven, where Prince smokes those seven deadly sins, what happens if we think about the album conceptually as that, as a kind of wrestling with Prince and himself and these seven deadly sins, right? So for me, less Arthur, it's about Prince necessarily trying to capture these things, but perhaps it's also about a kind of meta narrative with these kinds of struggles in this moment in the early 1990s. And he's seeing these kind of new emergencies of these seven deadly sins. And so it becomes a wrestling with. So for me, there's the kind of basic level about what the album is, but I think that there's a larger narrative to be kind of discussed and thought through when it comes to the Love Symbol album. So that's bracket that. So, favorite and least favorite. It's not my favorite, but I do want to defend Arrogance. I think Arrogance is great. I think Arrogance is a fantastic song. One of the reasons why, and this is actually tied to something that Arthur brought up about the kind of centrality of the booty on the album, is when I hear Arrogance, again, because I came to it later, but I'm someone who's from Florida, my mind goes to Two Live Crew and Hoochie Mama. So the kind of, sort of AAA, Arrogance makes me think about Hood Rat, Hoochie Mama. That same kind of rhythmic pattern exists in the choruses of each song. So when I finally got to a song like Arrogance, I had a kind of connection there because it felt like Florida. It felt like Two Live Crew. So I have this own kind of personal thing to Arrogance that I think is really great. But favorite is really I Want to Melt With You, which for those who've been watching this for these years, that for me, the kind of song that is the most sort of transgressive sexually, that's the song that like my mind goes to. That's the kind of taboo stuff. That's the boundary pushing stuff. I think the way that Prince is dealing, obviously, with sort of electronic dance music, with rave culture, I think obviously fits that. We see it coming up on an album like Come, which is also one of my favorite albums. But what I think is also interesting, this goes back to the previous panel with Dr. Ween, when she's talking about that particular song and its fetishization of fluids, but also in the kind of music video and the kind of masked sex rooms, backdoor room kind of culture, also for me reminds me of sex clubs in spaces like Berlin. And so what I want to add a kind of another layer to, I think, this kind of meta narrative on an album like this is, I'll say this, obviously, right, it's dealing with lust, right, which is another kind of deadly sin. But I think when we think about the kind of fetish and sex culture that exists in spaces like Berlin and places like Berlin, it becomes a kind of another geographical plane that Prince is actually exploring on this album, right? So we have Egypt, we have the sitar, so we have India here. There's a way that much like in an album like Around the World in a Day, Prince is very much traveling different sets of geographical spaces and sounds here. And I think he does that not necessarily in a kind of direct and explicit way in terms of the music itself, but I think really hits it home in a kind of music video with really a song like, sort of I Want to Melt With You. So I think that there's some really interesting things for me that I see and that I hear in that song. Least favorite, and I really want to fight because I don't think that they should be coupled. It's actually the flow, which I know you're going to be mad at me, D'Angelo, for that. But I do think the flow is just I actually don't like the transition between Arrogance and the flow. I don't think that they necessarily work as well together. I think that the 90 seconds of Arrogance are perfect. The 2.5 minutes of flow, not so much, right? So I think he managed to really bring sort of brevity home on a song like Arrogance, and it doesn't work in the same way on a song like Flow. That might be because I think there's a bit too much Tony M happening on that song. But I think that it doesn't work for me. The kind of back-to-back doesn't work to me. It doesn't work for me. That's also, I think, an issue that I have more broadly with the album. I don't necessarily like the sequencing, and I actually don't think that the kind of segues that aren't on the version that we have on the kind of commercially released album, I don't know if they would have helped with that. I think there are some songs that I would have moved around. And I think I would have put Flow somewhere else instead of having it come after Arrogance. So for me, it's one about the transition. And then I think as a song, Flow doesn't actually do much for me as a particular kind of rap song. So that's it. We can go on to the next person, which might be Miles, but who knows?
It's not going to be Miles, but it's going to be Zaheer. But Miles, we're getting to you. And I am also going to speak as well. But I am not kidding. I'm not trying to shock you guys. Prepare. This was not the case in real time. The case in real time for me was I Want to Melt With You, because I was heavy into electronica at that time, and I was like, oh, Prince can do this too. And I actually was waiting for like his rave album, like not Rave to the Joy, but I'm talking about like a real rave. I was like, okay, he's about to give it to us. I was super excited about I Want to Melt With You, but this month, preparing for the symposium, when I wanted to play one song off the album to get me in the mood, I would play The Flow. I kid you not. I kid you not. I'd be walking down the street. I need to hear the flow. I love the flow. And I personally love the transition into Arrogance, into the flow. And for me, like Arrogance is such a prototypical Prince song, just because like he's singing it in a way that he normally doesn't sing. He's like being like kind of, I don't know. I mean, he's kind of like in his yay space, because sometimes he can be a little super confident. And I love that Prince. I love all kinds of Princes, but I like the super confident Prince. But I don't know, musically, I love Arrogance into the Flow. But this isn't my time. I'm gonna hand the floor over to Zaheer, but I just had to respond to the flow because there's some people in the chat who are with me in terms of the flow as well. Just want to say that I'm not the only one. Thank you, chat. You guys know what's up. So Zaheer, take it away.
I'm going to be brief because I think I agree with a lot of what has already been said. I mean, for me, ultimately, it's 7 for all of the reasons stated. The anthemic nature of it, the easy sing along. It's a communal song, and so I really like 7. I really love the acoustic version that was available on the CD single release. That's just amazing. Because I was a little mixed with how Prince was sampling, right? Like I think sampling is very clear. I don't remember if he was sampling like this in Diamonds and Pearls, but like this was like where you start seeing the credits of sampling because of the laws that have gone into effect. I do think arrogance is an effective use of that Eric B and Rakim. I know you got soul sample. I think it's well incorporated. And it's combined with new musicality, so it's not just like taking someone's loop and running with it. My least favorite, I didn't even listen to the flow, so like that's not even registering for me. But of the songs that I listened to, my least favorite was like My Name is Prince. It was embarrassing for me. I had friends who were like, this was their introduction to Prince. To Anil's point, there was like a new audience that was cultivated with Diamonds and Pearls, and Prince's flow in Get Off passes, right? Like it's legit, it's smooth, it's a club banger. And then we get like My Name is Prince and I Am Funky. Like what? I didn't like the angry delivery, the growling. I didn't like the pace of delivery. I thought like Sexy MF has a much better, his part in Sexy MF is much more effective. Just 2 things. I was not a fan of the snare sound that was showing up in this album, or even more prominently. I think it was showing up a little bit in Diamonds, but really in this album, it's sort of, to me, and I don't know how to describe it, it's like a really clipped sound. Like it was really a small snare that I didn't like. But I did like the horns wherever they showed up, even in songs that I wasn't really a fan of. The horn arrangements on this album were top notch, and in everything. The horns are to this album what like maybe strings are to Under the Cherry Moon Parade, right? Like this to me was a horn album, and so those are my 2 pieces.
All right, Miles, let's have it.
Right. Yeah, I don't know. I think that the first time I realized that me and D'Angelo didn't see eye to eye was at the very first Symposium, because we were like, I just met her kind of, and we were cool, and everything was cool, and we were talking about why Sign of the Times is a masterpiece, and so I had to be like, well, Dirty Mind is a masterpiece, and applause, Purple Rain is a masterpiece, 1999 is a masterpiece. And D'Angelo says Controversy is a masterpiece. And I'm like, yeah, I don't know if Controversy is a masterpiece. I mean, they can all be masterpieces, but Controversy, not knowing it was her favorite Prince album of all time. And then, and things have sort of gone up and down since then. So the worst song is obviously The Flow. But I almost chose My Name is Prince, right? And I listened to it recently. I mean, I listened to the whole album, a few times last week. And I just, I gave it a pass, like, I guess I remember it a little more fondly than I expected to. His little jabs at Michael Jackson kind of made me laugh, walking down the street where he's, talking about, women will save your face, but they won't save your soul or something, I was like, oh, damn. why you snapping on Michael's face? He says, someone else says later, like, you got to be a prince before you're king anyway. And that was around the time where Michael was forcing MTV to call him the king of pop. And then it just sort of snowballed into this thing where we all take it for granted he's the king of pop. He like set that seed in the mouths of the VJs at MTV in the first place. And so, yeah, just the fact that he's sort of in the hip hop tradition, throwing in some disses to his rival, but no, I'm just not a Tony M fan. I mean, God bless Tony M, but in terms of the rhyming and the inclusion of hip hop on Prince records when Prince didn't really seem to really inherently enjoy hip hop or inherently understand it in the very beginning, it seemed forced to me. And I was a hip hop fan. And so, and this was like a golden age of hip hop. So there were too many fantastic hip hop albums out to sort of, I don't know, understand why Prince wanted to include it when he didn't have to, and when he didn't really seem to want to. Tony M was not the most skilled MC. And I guess wherever he pops up kind of irks me a little bit or bothers me a little bit. But no, my favorite track on the album is probably The Morning Papers. Yeah. I like that's the Prince I like. I mean, and so to get back to D'Angelo and I love pop Prince. That's what I'm here for.
I hate The Morning Papers. I hate The Morning Papers. Oh my God.
That's what I'm here for. So when she said Diamonds and Pearls, rubbed her the wrong way because, he's going for that pop audience. That made me say hooray, like, great. Okay, so he's coming for it again, like, not that I didn't enjoy the albums that he released previously. I like all kinds of Prince. But I'm definitely down for the pop Prince where he feels like, well, I could write a hit overnight here, and then it's Cream and it goes #1, and like, not that Cream is my favorite song, but yeah, The Morning Papers, it just the structure of it, and then the guitar solo in the middle, and it's like it's pop, it's a pop confection, I love that kind of stuff. There are also maybe 60 seconds of 3 Chains of Gold that are just like really beautiful. Like you feel like you can just visualize it where it feels like he's breaking through the trees and there's sunshine, and like that could have been the whole song, or that could have been, I'm sure it probably was at some point, a 5-minute song that we've never heard. I love that a lot. And yeah, I guess so. Favorite, Morning Papers, and of course 7. Yeah, I mean 7 would be neck and neck with Morning Papers, but 7's already been chosen twice. I'll go with Morning Papers, and the worst, sure, the flow, Arrogance, I'll leave it alone. Yeah.
Okay. I love that we do these, and I love that we don't agree, because we definitely don't agree this time, and I knew that we wouldn't, but that's totally okay. Actually, it's really hard for me to pick a favorite, even though that, like, the flow has been the one that I've been listening to the most recently. But the reason why I named the Symposium Sexy MF is because I've always had that song never gets old. Every single time I've heard it live, it is incredible. When the NPG performed at Paisley Park post Prince, they opened with Sexy MF, and I cried on the spot. I mean, it was just so powerful live with the horns. It is an incredible song. However, there are a lot of other incredible songs. We already talked about I Want to Melt With You. We haven't talked about And God Created Woman, which I think is an extremely beautiful song. And I even love 3 Chains of Gold. In real time, I did not like 3 Chains of Gold because I thought it was derivative, right? And I didn't like how it started. But listening to it for the Symposium, how epic it is. Yes, he could do the guitar solo in his sleep, but it is so impeccably placed and felt, the guitar solo, the forever, it's just like at the end, I mean, it's just really, really epic. So Damn You was also one of my favorite songs in real time. again, I kind of pair it. Anytime I listen to Damn You, for whatever reason, I want to listen to Strolling, even though they're not really connected musically, but they're connected for me for some reason. I don't know. Sweet Baby is another incredible song. I'm not a big fan of Seven. I think it was Arthur who said that he understands why people like it. I understand why people like it. I personally never liked it. I still don't like it. I think, again, it's like pop Prince. It's like it's just too pop for me in terms of Seven. And I also don't like The Sacrifice of Victor. I think it's pop gospel. It's what I call pop gospel, and I detest. I love gospel, but I detest pop gospel. So I really wish that the album ended with 3 Chains of Gold, because it's so epic. And actually, going from And God Created Woman into 3 Chains of Gold, I think it's just really beautiful. If you sit down and really listen to it, not multitasking, but actually just listening to the album, it's an incredible journey going from And God Created Woman to 3 Chains of Gold. And I really wish that the album would have ended there, and maybe Sacrifice of Victor could have been like a B-side or something like that. And so The Morning Papers is probably my least favorite song on the album, but it is a very close tie with Blue Light. Blue Light is very similar to me to Slow Love, which I absolutely love. No, I don't hate that song. And the reason why I hate Slow Love is the same reason why I hate Blue Light. Anybody could, like, this. I feel like this is a song he should have given to Kenny Rogers or somebody, Blue Light. Like, it doesn't sound like a Prince song. It sounds like a song, pseudo reggae. Like, who wants pseudo reggae from Prince? I mean, not me. So it would be like a really, close tie between The Morning Papers. And then somebody tell me, I wanted to be on this panel just so you guys can tell me, why in the world was he wearing that tartan plaid? Or maybe Cassie will tell me tomorrow to her presentation for The Morning Papers. I never understood that. When you go from Sexy MF, the video, then you go to The Morning Papers video, and he's in that tartan. But okay, enough of that. All right, so we have some questions in the Q&A, and I want to remind everyone to put your questions in the Q&A section, which is to the right of the chat, so that I can actually see it. So I am going to show this question from my brother-in-arms from the Grown Folks Music Podcast, Ricky Wyatt. In the past, we have viewed Prince releases in totality with the side project releases that came out. How do each of you view 92 output, Love Symbol, Gold In, Carmen, the unreleased I'll Do Anything project? So any comments on this question? Take it away. Or not?
I think this is better than Carmen.
Go ahead, Anil. You said you think the Love Symbol is better than Carmen's album. Is that what you said?
I'm being silly. I actually think there's a sort of meta point. Why don't we talk about these as a whole? Like, we regularly talk about the time, alongside 1999, whatever. I think they were very disjoint, and they weren't very released, right? You think about the MPG album; it was not easy to find. It wasn't like you were going to go to your Columbia House record, subscription and go and order that. And Carmen's album, I mean, it was a joke even at the time, right? It was very obviously kind of just like thrown out there on the side. And so I think there's a lot here that's like, why don't we talk about them as a whole? Is they're not. It was not the case that, like, the interplay of like, maybe that'll be on the Apollonia record. No, I'm going to pull it back into Purple Rain because that's such a strong song with Take Me With You. There's none of that, or vice versa, right? Like, oh, this was so good, but I gave it to a side act and they're going to go run with it. There's nothing on those albums, I think that we could reasonably assert was like material that could have been in the same level as what Prince put on his own album. The other thing I think is a big factor here, which we forget because of the change in distribution, everything that's happened since then. This was, I think, in a lot of ways, his first made for CD album. It was a long album, right? And it was on vinyl, a double album. but it was not promoted or positioned as a double album because the industry had made the change to CD. And so I think that's something that's pretty pertinent to like the perception of this thing was there was a feel. This is a weird thing again if we're not paying attention to this stuff at the time, but there was like a sense of like you get a lot of value if there's a lot of music on the CD. And so people were making 70-minute records because you could put that on the CD. And I think that's part of why you get I Want to Melt With You, added in there. I think that's why you get so many different genres. Like I think I don't have a lot of love for Blue Light either, but I think he was like, I can do that. I think there's a reason it goes back to back of like I did a reggae song kind of, and I did a rave song kind of, because they're like, look at me, I'm doing everything, right? Here's a little bit of jazz, here's a little bit of rap, right? And I think that was, there was such a big part of the promotion of the marketing. But when that's your story, basically volume, look how much you get a lot of different genres. Is a Prince really showing it how he can do everything? The side acts don't mean anything. Nobody's like, I wonder if he did a funk album on the side, or I wonder if he's got a girl protege. And then the other part is, I don't want to go too far in Carmen's album. I was sort of joking, but she was clearly supposed to be a response to like Vanilla Ice. She was pop rap. She was absolutely supposed to be that. And I think Prince's thought process was, if they like a white guy doing this, they're definitely gonna like a white girl doing this. I don't think it was much deeper than that in terms of the effort that he put in. There's no way that stands up against, in this case, I think something like Sexy MF, it's just a great song. Like it's not the most unique soundscape they ever did, but you're like, it's undeniable that nobody can't smile when they hear that song. There's nothing like that on those records, so they don't end up in dialogue with it.
Zaheer, did you want to say something? No.
No, I never listened to Carmen's album. I never bought it. Don't have it. Don't feel like I'm missing anything. I did like on the Golden Age album. I did like Together though. I thought that was a good song. And I think it was released as a single, or released, we'll put in quotes to point to Anil's issue, or what Anil's talked about in terms of the distribution issue. Because I do feel like at this point, the level of gang violence had reached such a point that there were these truces happening around the country. This is, the album, the Love Symbol album comes out on the heels of the April 92 verdict that found all the officers who beat Rodney King not guilty, and the uprisings that took place, and a growing sense in communities of reevaluating who our ire should be directed towards, right? Like not ourselves, not each other, not turf warfare, but understanding how we were all playing into the war that the state had been participating or had been engineering against Black communities. And so, Prince is, I know that we like to like hermetically seal him in this bubble as though he is not in conversation with the world. Now, his way of processing what he is seeing in the world might not be as legible to everyone because they don't have those reference points, right? But if we're going to accept the storyline that Prince sat down and watched a documentary on Nostradamus on HBO in a hotel motel room and then wrote 1999, then why can't we then situate this album in what was going on at the time, right? And so there were gang truces being organized around the country, including a big truce that was organized, a meeting that was organized in Minneapolis by Spike Moss, who was also the organizer of the Way. So for Prince to not, he knew that. He knew about it. He knew it. He was speaking to it. His gun microphone is his way of like, let us shift this attention away from violence to music. It's why love is the overriding ethic of this album. It is, to Arthur's point, the horn, the final call. We can't ignore the role of the Nation of Islam in adjudicating and mediating many of these gang truces, including the one in Minneapolis. And there were people who were in the NOI who were on Prince's payroll doing his security all the way through the late 90s, right? So Prince is in conversation with all of this, and I think that to me is why, like, even when I got Gold Nigga and heard like Together, this was, it was a decent outing. It was sort of a little bit of a nod to G-Funk, right? With the sort of high pitched synth like running throughout the track. And its message was about addressing gang violence. So so that's the only, sort of other side project that I could think of. But I think to Anil's point, like these did not sound like of a piece, right? Like they were really different in that respect.
All right, so Michael Dean, I'm going to put it on the stage. I don't know if we're going to spend much time on it because we've already sort of spoken to Carmen. So does anyone want to speak to T.C. Ellis's album?
I'll take that.
Okay.
Yeah, I had written I had interviewed TC at a certain point. I had wanted to do an album on Paisley Park Records. A book on Paisley Park Records, period. And so I had interviewed a bunch of them during a certain space and time, right? So I interviewed TC and I played his album again around that time, right? I mean, I don't enjoy it. It's not a good album. But it's just interesting. It was interesting speaking to TC and like getting his reflections on why it came out that way. Because he was rapping in a certain style that was just kind of outdated for when his album dropped. It's not that he wasn't a skilled MC, it's that I guess his flow was more like sort of a Curtis Blow kind of flow, or even like a Houdini kind of flow. And hip hop at that time was overturning, like, every 18 months or less, where you had like a Bomb Squad sort of style, De La Soul, like both of those groups using a bunch of samples, and then certain laws being passed where you couldn't do samples anymore. And, even with A Tribe Called Quest and the Native Tongues, incorporating sort of, jazz elements that weren't heard before, really. Like hip hop was just, it was flipping. Dr. Dre, obviously, bringing in a whole other thing of incorporating a lot of Parliament Funkadelic into his music and using real musicians on the low to record the tracks. And, like T.C. Ellis's album just wasn't of its time the way it should have been. On top of which, Prince was so heavily involved, and Prince he didn't really get hip hop in the beginning. And so he couldn't fake that funk. You know what I mean? Hip hop had its own thing happening, and he was wrestling with it. And I guess T.C. Ellis's album was sort of a casualty of that conflict, that Prince had against or with hip hop at the time.
Thank you, Miles Marshall Lewis. I don't know why I was fixated on Marshall. So there's another question from Miss TLC, and curious if the Booty Boom section, if the core four appreciate the storytelling. I don't know, it went away. So basically, it says, appreciate the storytelling rock opera factor of this album, and if they would attend a Broadway premiere performance of a hypothetical and God Created Blue Light, the Morning Papers musical. So you can see the question in the Q&A chat in case, because it just popped off like an air meat thing. Yes.
Hey, so I think this would have translated a lot better on the stage. I think that Graffiti Bridge would have translated much better on the stage, were it not saddled with the responsibility of being the Purple Rain sequel in order to get Warner Brothers to finance the film. And then there was the Edgar Cruz, help me, but there was the opera, the dance that was done prior to the release of the Come album, and then of course we had the Kama Sutra and later. So yeah, I think that this would have been a much better received via the stage, not film, but actually the stage. The concept, I like the idea of it being a rock opera. Actually, that's something that attracted me to the album, or to wanting to hear it prior to me actually hearing the album. The concept was a little lost on me, the storytelling of it. I thought that in some ways, to D'Angelo's point, there were some things.
I don't mean to interrupt you. You can continue real quick. I just wanted to interject that there were segues that were left off this album because he added "I Want to Melt with You" kind of pseudo last minute or whatever, and had those segues, been left in place, the story of the album might have been more obvious, or But I mean, you knew that. I'm not sure if that had been said already or something, but I just wanted to throw that in there.
Yeah, I see. I think that he had actually done concept albums better earlier in his career without actually trying to. I think Love Sexy was a fantastic concept album. The construct of Love Sexy itself being this spiritual construct, and these characters, Spooky Electric and Love Sexy, and sort of kind of Not Really Camille being a part of that narrative also. Even earlier, before 1999, being this dystopian now, this glooming environment in which Prince, as the narrator, goes through these different scenes of trying to find gratification and understanding and and direction, etc. That's not to say that. Well, actually, that is to say that the Love Symbol album was a poorly executed concept on record. But I do think that this was Prince openly and clearly trying to say, I am going to attempt to give you a message, since you really didn't get all that in the previous times that I was trying to. But yeah, it would be nice to. And I think that, again, going back to the whole deluxe thing, right? There's an opportunity to do some of that by including a lot of this visual material along with.
I agree. I mean, I think Prince was always just 2 steps away from musical theater. When you think about how he conceived his projects, why there needed to be clothing or costumes that went along with each project, certain kinds of visual aesthetics, place settings, right? Like the sort of staging that I think Elliott alluded to, structures, props. It was never just a sonic experience for Prince, right? And it wasn't even just a live experience. It was really a whole world making. He was into world making, and that is exactly what people who do theater do, right? They do world making, and that's how we understand like why. Because I think the way that a lot of people misread or read Prince, a lot of like vanity is read into his work because of the emphasis on clothes, right? And people who were like rock critics are like, this guy's spending more effort on how he looks than making more interesting music. Like there's a sort of critique of Prince for his emphasis on these things that people are like, that has nothing to do with music. But for Prince, it was like everything, right? And so to see Prince as this visual designer and world making, I think that's why so many, even like Sign of the Times, like look at his production of Sign of the Times. It's like, there's like skits that, like Purple Rain was basically a musical with skits, right? And The Second Coming was coming out of that, right? Like a musical with skits. Like he was always thinking of like a whole, like, what is this supposed to look like? What is this supposed to feel like? Where are people supposed to be positioned with this? There's a costume, there's a, so I just think that is always part of his work and an important way to understand his work.
Yeah, I would throw in that the Love Sexy tour, where despite the fact that the Black Album didn't even come out, he had these dark songs from the Black Album at the end of the first half of the Love Sexy show that, represented the dark, and then we came into the light with the more spiritual side of the Love Sexy songs that started the Act 2 of the Love Sexy tour. Like that's all very musical as well,
Yeah, I would sort of add in, this is also the era where it started, frankly, as a fan, being really frustrating, his haphazardness with it, right? There had always been a sort of like, I mean, you look at the on stage segues in the Sign of the Times movie, and they're not super fleshed out, but it's fun because the show is so good. It's like, okay, he put a little bit of story around it and we're all right. But as a story, it's not there, right? And it kind of doesn't matter because you're sort of filling in. I mean, there's a couple songs that we tie into it. Graffiti Bridge, you know, we've talked a lot about. I think there is it looks like a filmed stage production. You know what I mean? It kind of has that vibe to it. And then a lot of folks in the comments have been talking about this, but I think there is this context of like he clearly had ambitions about being able to do it all, right? So the record is every genre, but the career moment is, let's not forget, he's now a VP at Warner Brothers, which he took pretty seriously. Like he was going to like revitalize Paisley Park as a record label, and he's putting real money into Carmen's record. He's got the, billboards with Joffrey Ballet. He's starting to work on Ulysses. And the Glam Slam clubs are still open. I mean, we're 2 years away from him having his first perfume. Right? Like that's just like, and the retail store he had to have been planning at that point because it opens not long after. Like nobody can do all that, right? Like that's like trying to be, I don't know, like whatever, Steve Jobs and Beyonce at the same time, right? And so, he's got all these irons in the fire. And I think what gets lost in this, we're like, oh, well, there's the missing segues. You add them in. It's not like it all of a sudden makes sense. And here we have this clear narrative, right? It's still fuzzy. And I think that's the thing that was very frustrating, right? Was like, I'm like, you are a gifted and otherworldly storyteller, and you have the ability to build narratives that'll pull us in. And you're sprinkling in some shit that you made as a skit, in 5 minutes. And it shows like you don't care about it like you care about your music. You would never skimp on a song like that. You would not cut corners there, right? And I think that was a thing that is part of my experience of this album is the everything around it, right? Not the tour, obviously. He's never going to compromise on stage, whatever. But he would have the segues that were on stage. You're like, I don't get it. You know what I mean? It's like he didn't care that we can get it, which is fine. An artist has that prerogative. The music, there was no compromise. But you start to get a little bit of the fraying of everything around it. And I think this is sort of what leads to the career crisis of the following couple of years is he's like, I can do everything. And people who are around him are like, yeah, but you're not doing a good job of it. And I think that's the first time I'd seen things out of Prince's camp that were not great, right? That were just like, I can't say in good faith, you got to go listen to this. You got to go check this out. I mean, not listen, the music was always good, but like you couldn't go like, go watch this video. And that 3 Chainz video, man, like it was embarrassing. Like you'd have somebody over and you put it on because I got it. I was like, oh, we're going to see the new Prince thing, right? And you're like, yeah, I'm going to take this back to Blockbuster real quick, right? Like that's it. So I think that's a real, I think that colors a lot of the impression of it. At the same time, like the weirder shit was actually really interesting. We haven't talked about the To Whom It May Concern, right? He made a commercial for the record. And he starts to sample everything. This became the habit, right? He first did it with the Shake remix on Graffiti Bridge, but he starts to make like his own mega compilations of his records. Who does that? He's the only one that could because he made the whole record, right? And I think like that's sort of fascinating. I think the ambition he had of clearly he was going to do another like a 90s version of Triple Threat with Carmen opening and the MPG and then him. Like you could see, because we know his career now, you could see the rough shape of like what was in his mind, but he didn't see it through and it got messy and he didn't sort of have that same drive or that will, or he had different focuses. I mean, he had a lot going on in his life. So I think that's such a, that is as much a part of this story as the music, I think in a lot of ways, but at the same time he did, when he did Arsenio again, it was incredible. It was incredible. Like it was just an unbelievable performance. And what was meaningful to me at the time is he didn't go back to I Got to Play Purple Rain. When he did the Diamonds and Pearls set on Arsenio, he's got to play Purple Rain. Right. This time he's like, you're going to hear the new stuff. Right. But you also have the like people have asked me about the Continental. I think there's a lot of great stuff. Like a lot of the songs are great. The Max I thought really shined, especially in piano and a mic. Like there's so much depth and material. I didn't notice it. I mean, I knew I liked the hook. I liked the piano part. But I didn't notice how strong that song was until Piano and a Mic. And I'm just like, you don't have Tony on the hook. You don't have 50 layers of, you know, production on top of it. You have Prince and a piano, and you're like, God damn, this guy has it. You know, so I think that's the piece that, that's sort of my feeling about the whole record, is not like the criticism was overproduced, which I don't really care about that, but the not doing a few things well, but doing a lot of things poorly on top of the record really colored it.
So can I say one kind of quick thing though? I think, you know, I think everyone has said fantastic stuff. One of the kind of questions that I have along these lines, right? We talk about obviously Prince as the artist who does music, but who's doing stuff visually, who's also doing stuff involving dance, right? We all know that Prince is a fantastic dancer, and that got me thinking, what would have happened, right? So we know that Prince is obviously a fantastic dancer, but I'm thinking about how great it was when Cat was there, right? And so I think about this part, and then I think about his kind of collaboration with David Henry Wong, right? Writing solo, right? I'm thinking about these kind of collaborative moments that are brief, but you see these kinds of seeds of brilliance that can turn into something amazing, right? So like Prince is fantastic as a musician. He works with a dancer like Cat. Dancing kind of really breaks open, right? Prince is not necessarily like a playwright, but he works with David Henry Wong, and things become really beautiful. And so I'm actually thinking about this really great moment, this kind of potential that could have been but never was, right? If Prince had actually followed that through, that could have been something amazing. So I would have totally been on board with a stage production if Prince worked with the right person who can necessarily kind of challenge him in a way that Cat did, in a way that David Henry Wong did, to kind of really think about how I can be Prince, but also incorporate these things, and we can kind of develop something amazing. So that's where my mind is also going here.
So one of the things, so actually Miles and Anil, you both kind of touched on this, but I did kind of want to talk a little bit more about the segues, and also Kirstie Alley's presence on the album as well as in the videos, which I found weird at the time. I also found it weird that Troy Bayer was in the mix as well, because I had seen her maybe on a different world. I don't know where I saw her, but I knew that she was an actress. So I was sort of used to Prince sort of using his own cohort of people, you know, who are around him, you know, the Vanities, the Jills. And so introducing like these well-known actresses in the mix was a bit strange for me personally. But the segues, even though it boiled down to only two, though the one that's right before Three Chains of Gold, I actually enjoy only for Prince, not for Kirstie, in terms of when he's talking about the tone box and
Barbarella.
Yeah, and yeah. So I actually really enjoy that just as a skit of Prince. Like if I could remove her, I would. But I was happy that the segues were removed for I Want to Melt With You, because I can't imagine that album without I Want to Melt With You. So, but because of the Three Chains of Gold video, as well as the Three Chains of Gold comic book, and like he is trying to put across the story, I think that in theory, it would have been great if the segues were on the album, even though I personally would not have wanted them on there. But in terms of like the transmedia storytelling, which hopefully Zach is going to actually talk to us about in the next panel and maybe enlighten it, I think it might help with telling the story that he was trying to tell. We only have like 6 minutes left.
Well, can I just make a 60-second thing about skits?
Yeah.
I just want to put the album in context, because maybe 2 years before the release of this record, we have De La Soul's 3 Feet High and Rising, and it blows up skits in music, period, particularly in hip hop. But like the conceit of that record is that there's a game show going on, and before the music even starts on that album, they're like, you know, they're introducing each MC as like a game show contestant, and by the end somebody wins. 2 years after this Prince record, or probably 2 years after, a year or two after, we have no, let's say 3 years after, we have Life After Death, right? Or not even, Ready to Die, let's say. Biggie's first album, where you turn on the record and like he's born and you hear his parents rushing his mom to the hospital, and then he's born, and by the end he's like killed himself, and in the middle he's a star and Lil' Kim gives him a blowjob or something. Like, these are movies on album, and in album form. And given that the Symbol album came out after the flop of Graffiti Bridge, maybe Prince had it in his head that I can make I can put the storyline of an album, just a storyline of a movie on an album, because that's what's happening now anyway. And he was, I guess, one of the earliest to do that. Like, when this album came out, there might have only been 10 albums period that had sort of fooled around with that idea.
So actually, there's one question in the chat from Dr. Funkenberry, and I actually really want to ask it, because actually I was going to ask it. This was going to be my final question. So Dr. Funkenberry, you actually read my mind. I'm going to put a little commentary to the end of this. So which song on Love Symbol should have been released as a single that could have been a hit? So, there are 5 singles. The last single was The Morning Papers, and I never understood why The Morning Papers was a single when there were so many other songs, in my humble opinion, that he could have selected other than The Morning Papers for a single. So I would love to hear from each and every one of you which song on Love Symbol should have been released as a single that could have been a hit.
I just think The Morning Paper should have come first, or at least second. My Name is Prince shouldn't have been released as a single, or it probably shouldn't have been on the album at all. So, like The Morning Papers, had it come out after Sexy MF, I think it would have been definitely a bigger hit. I think that's kind of obvious.
Yeah, isn't this where we can talk about In God Created Woman? To me, that would have been a what do you say, multi-genre? I hate the word genre, but I could see that on pop radio. I could see that on Hot 100 radio. I could see that on R&B radio, old school and new school. And I think In God Created Woman would have crossed a lot of different lines because of its theme and because it's musical and also because it's Prince. We've got our whole family has a big saying, right? Well, it's Prince. He can exist in different ways and in different forms. I can't think of any. I truly can't think of any other song. Maybe The Max, but I don't think it would have the power of In God Created Woman.
Yeah, I think
was To the Nines a single, a planned single?
I think it was a planned single, but then it got replaced by The Morning Papers, right? Isn't that right? Can someone verify that in the chat? Some of my purple.
Well, I think To the Nines would have been a good single. Yeah. A single edit without the booty boom section, right? But a single edit. Because To the Nines, there's I've heard jazz artists cover To the Nines, right? Like really well covers, like really like it. That song.
So No Love for Damn You. I think Damn You could have worked too. I like Damn You.
Wasn't that a single?
That was a single. Was it a single? Sorry. Oops, sorry. That was my bad. Sorry.
Yeah, it was a single.
Wow. I really hasn't memorized Prince Vault.
Yeah. So on Prince Vault, it says, and shout out to Prince Vault, and we love Prince Vault. It's the website I go to every day. So Michael Dean, websites are not dead because Prince Vault still exists. Michael Dean put in there that websites were dead in the chat, but Prince Vault is number 1. All right. So at the end of A Love to the Nines paragraph, an edit of the track was also planned as the A side of A Love to the Nines single in spring 1993, but the single was left unreleased. I always thought that, for me, The Morning Papers was trying to appeal to the pop audience. I thought that Sweet Baby would have been a better choice as a single to get the Diamonds and Pearls people. Who are really into, I'm talking about the song Diamonds and Pearls, I think would have translated really well for that crowd. Sweet Baby. Zaheer is not convinced. He was like, no, honey.
Well, actually, so there's this, Sweet Baby has one of my most favorite Prince lines of all time. And that line is, "The road you choose to walk in this life is the road that leads into the next." I just get emotional every time I hear that line. Like, that's just such a beautiful, beautiful line. I think Sweet Baby could have worked as like a kind of pseudo country song. But yeah, that's all I had to say about Sweet Baby. Like,
Yeah,
I love that line. That
I
line
think
is like,
I do think Sweet Baby is a beautiful composition. It feels like a lot of those "I'll Do Anything" tracks, like he just was in this interestingly sort of paternal kind of mode. I think y'all are crazy though. If you think Sweet Baby or God Created Woman would have done anything on radio, I think people would have been like, nope. What is this quiet shit? And also, like, let's not forget in that moment, like God Created Woman, like that's a real biblical title to be putting out as your single in 1992. Like, I think folks would have been like, what is this? Is this gospel track? What is this? Right. So I think people were cautious. So I really think the Max would have gone. I mean, it's got hooks galore. It's, you know, it just sort of, you can see what the video would be. I mean, I guess they did a concert video on the one video tape, but like that really go. The other thing I missed compared to like Diamonds and Pearls that spoiled us was singles having those 45-minute long EPs around them that were good as hell. Like the Get Off single, the Cream single. I love those better than I love the original song, you know, in case of Cream. And so I think, imagine like the Max having a 12-inch you know, single, I think would be pretty powerful. And you know, I think it's also about like what audience he's going for. I mean, I think like this was a tough transition where like Damn You I loved and Prince loved, right? Like he even said that in his draft of the liner notes for the hits, like Damn You was his song. And you know, it was service to black radio and it didn't do numbers, right? And I genuinely don't know why. It's a great song, great vocal, great whatever.
It was a great
You know,
video as well.
yeah, exactly. Like great performance, whatever. And so I think this is just like my feeling, because I saw in the chat folks are like, do I mean white radio? I actually think across the board, I think there was like a hard time getting his songs out in that moment. And I think that's part of why you lead to the crisis in his career in the coming years as a label. And now, I mean, I'm putting the blame on Warner's. Like, I think if they knew how to market him, they would have, there's a lot of opportunities they missed. So I'm not like, you know, blaming the victim here, but I think this is a moment where because he was all over the place and he was doing so many things, and this is not a genre record. This is an every genre record. You know, it's a hard thing to service, but I think the Max was like what folks wanted out of Prince kind of across the board. Like everybody could root for that version of Prince. And I think that's the thing that they didn't get the chance to do.
So we're out of time, but I do want to kind of respond really quickly to something. You triggered something in me, Anil, that we actually haven't talked about. So technically Sexy MF was the lead single, but it was kind of released before the album. And so technically I always consider My Name is Prince to be the lead single versus Sexy MF. And because My Name is Prince, which was released closer to the release of the album, and the video and the song, a lot of people parodied that song. I remember the In Living Color skit. I think that the album was dead on arrival just based on My Name is Prince. And then when the video came out, it sort of nailed it. So like even a beautiful song like Damn You, and even the morning papers, if people like that song, it seemed like people like that song. I think it just would have been dead just because of My Name is Prince. He got a lot of ridicule for that song as well as that album in real time. I personally love the song. I don't think it should be off. I think it's like him being funny. Like I really don't think he's taking himself seriously. That's my take on it, and I could be totally wrong. I would love to hear from someone who was in the band or what, but I know sometimes he didn't even talk to people in the band, so nobody knows what Prince was thinking. But who knows? But thank you so much. We could talk forever. The 90 minutes always goes by so darn fast. And I just want to say, you have no idea how amazing it is that you have taken the time out of your lives to be here with me again. And I'm talking to you, Zaheer, Anil, Elon Mouse, Marshall Lewis, Elliott, and Arthur. It means so much to me to talk about what I love talking about, Prince. And this is one of my favorite albums. So thank you for being here, even though some of you didn't like it as much as I did. Thank you so much. All right, so we're going to transition. We're going to take a bio break for about 30 minutes. Then we're going to have our presentation panel number 2. It is going to be a heavy presentation panel. We have Stephen G. Fullwood for one thing. One of my favorite controversy talks. The controversy talks from 1+1+1 is 3 were amazing. You can find them in the booth. You can go to the controversy, the 1+1+1 is 3 booth way at the bottom, and it'll link you to all the videos. Zach Hoskins did an amazing controversy talk as well. He's going to bring it, I know, for his transmedia storytelling conversation. And then Robert Loss, also one of my favorite presenters. He's going to talk about the comic books. And then we have our visual, just amazing, extraordinary Edgar Cruz, who's my mom's favorite presenter because she says Edgar knows how to put together a presentation. So I know my mom is probably watching, just waiting for Edgar's presentation. So I hope that you take some bio breaks and you get ready for an amazing presentation panel. Thank you.